All right, thanks, Mike. Everyone should see my screen. Just says ABC distribution up in the upper left-hand corner. I'll go ahead and get started with the demonstration. Keep in mind this will be a pretty short 15-minute presentation just to give you a high-level overview of EZContentManager and some of its more popular features. Hopefully this sparks your interest. We can schedule a one-on-one demonstration with you and take you into a lot more detail of the product. So EZContentManager is what we call a web-enabled, also known as a browser-enabled document management system. What that means is users access, manage, approve documents directly from a browser. Like you see here, I'm in Internet Explorer. But for those users that are working inside of Dynamics GP, they have the ability to access information in EZContentManager directly from those screens. And I'll show you an example of that as we go through the demonstration. We call this a web-enabled system, but keep in mind you own the software, so you buy it, you own it, you host it on your own server, but they just make it available through the browser. So what you're looking at here is the main directory for the company called ABC Distribution. So right here I've got some folders I've set up. I've got accounts payable documents. I'm storing AR contracts, HR stuff. And this folder structure is completely user-defined, so you can lay it out and you can organize it any way that you like for the content that you want to store. Now, there are a number of ways to bring documents into EZContentManager. I'm going to start with talking about using what's called optical character recognition, also called OCR. This is a tool that lets you capture documents automatically and capture data from those documents. That data is called metadata, and bring that into EZContentManager. For the invoicing side, typically OCR is used for AP invoices. So let me start with that. With the optical character recognition process, what you're able to do is have your vendor send you invoices like you're doing today. You know, some are going to mail you paper invoices. With this tool, you can take those paper invoices and you can scan them to a network folder with a multifunction copier scanner. You could just scan them with a local scanner to PDF. Your vendors can email you invoices. That's the preferred method, because with this tool, our system will automatically capture the attached email invoices and process those without any user intervention. Once the invoices have been captured, what the tool does is it does the optical character recognition, where it basically reads the invoice, and then it starts to identify things on the invoice that we predefine that we want. So this picks up things like the logo, so that way I know who the vendor is. It picks up information like the invoice number, the purchase order number if there's a PO for this invoice, the date, the amount. For PO-based invoices, we'll even read the line items. And we pick all that information up, and then what we do is we take the invoice along with that metadata. Again, the metadata are those things like the invoice number, the vendor name, the date, and we move that invoice and data into what's called the verify module. And the verify module is where a user has interaction with the system. This is where you can verify that what you wanted to capture from the invoice was done correctly. So let me go into, I'll show you the verify module. I'm going to go into verify, and I've got two invoices that are waiting for me to take a look at. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select them both, and I'm going to hit start. Now the first one pops open on screen here, and you can see here to the right, I've got these metadata fields that I had predefined I wanted for this invoice. In this case, I'm picking up a number of things, like the invoice number, the date, different things like trade discounts. Some of these fields are optional, and you can fill them in or not fill them in depending on what you want to have happen. So for the first field, it pretty much got all this stuff. It got to currency, and it needs me to define what the currency is. So I'm going to tell it that this time it's a US dollars. Then it wants me to put in a description. That's an optional field. I'll leave it blank. Location's optional. Department's optional. And I can say, yeah, I do want to leave that field blank. And then I'm ready to move on to the next one. Now, when I do this, I can predefine that I want these things to be required or optional. And like with US dollars, where I put in currency here, I can optimize this so next time around, it doesn't ask me for these things if I don't want them, so they wouldn't get stuck here at verify and make me have to select something. So it's up to you how you want to configure this. If I go to the next invoice, same thing. I'm going to tell it, hey, you know, US dollars for this one. I'm going to go ahead and leave the description blank. It's okay to leave that field blank. And I'm going to be done with this one. And I'm going to go ahead and move this one into EZContentManager. Before I leave the invoice here and verify, I want to talk a little bit about how this process works. Some of you may be familiar with optical character recognition. There are basically two different types. The most common approach is what's called the template approach. For the template approach, you basically have to tell the system, hey, for every vendor invoice, I have to define where everything is. I mean, it works, but it's a lot of setup, because what if I have 500 invoices or 500 different vendors? I mean, so for this one, I could tell, okay, hey, the invoice number's in this position, so I draw a box around it the first time. The invoice date is here. The ship to address is here, everything I want. And I have to do this for every single invoice. Now, the way this tool works, this OCR tool that we use, is it doesn't work on a template approach. It works on what's called a keyword approach. This way, I only have to create one template for all of my vendor invoices. So this way, I tell it, hey, look for the word invoice NO period sign, invoice number spelled out, invoice pound sign, invoice date, the word date. So there's a table with all these different possibilities. That way, when I feed the system invoices, even the first time it sees an invoice, it does a very good job of finding the data because it looks for the keyword and just looks around the word to pick up the value. So this way it makes the setup a lot quicker. There's a little bit of what we call optimization that you do to finalize things. That takes really just a matter of seconds sometimes as opposed to creating a complete template for each invoice, vendor invoice. So this makes the setup a lot quicker. So I'm going to dismiss that one. So that one's all completed. And now those invoices move automatically into EZContentManager. At the same time those invoices move into our document management system, we create the transaction inside of Dynamics GP. So now the transaction has been created. I didn't have to key that in. And now what can happen is, for let's say for your non-PO based invoices, I can go ahead and automatically start those invoices into what's called a workflow, because maybe I need to route those invoices around because somebody needs to approve them. So now if I go into my Process Manager screen here, I can see I've got 4 invoices that are waiting for me to approve. So with workflows, I can decide really all the aspects of a workflow. So we're going to talk about the AP invoice approval workflow. Again, you may have an approval workflow for your non-PO invoices. Maybe you have an approval workflow for your purchase order-based invoices. Some people do, some people don't. That's completely up to you. So for the invoice approval for non-PO, we'll use that as the example today. I can first decide when I just set up the workflows, okay, how many steps are there in the approval process? Is there 1 step, or there 2 steps, 3 steps? You know, who are the people and the participants at each step? Okay, step 1, this person has to approve it. Step 2, it's this other group of people. I can also do dynamic routing based on metadata. So I could take any of that data that we collected. So I can say, as an example, hey, if the dollar amount of the invoice is over $500, well, it doesn't go to this person, it goes to this person, because they have to see the higher dollar ones. I can also decide how I want the participants to be notified that they need to approve something. I can send an email each time they need to approve something automatically, or I can send what we call a consolidated email, where it's going to send one email at a set time during the day, just showing the people, hey, this is a list of what you have pending. Or some people don't want any emails or any notifications because they're just going to come into EZContentManager and they're going to look at this screen, this Process Manager screen, and they can see everything that's pending for me. So this is everything that I have pending that I need to approve. So if this is what's most important to me, I would set this as my home screen, so when I log in, this is the first screen I'm going to see. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select one of the invoices, and this is where I can do my electronic review. In this case, for this workflow, at the first step that I called Location Manager Approval, there's basically just one choice. This person's going to look at the invoice, and they're going to hit the Review Complete button once they've done that. But that was up to me when I set up the workflow. I could have had a second button, a third button, a fourth button that I can call and have do anything I want if I wanted this workflow to go down a different path. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at it. So I'm going to hit the Edit button, and I'm going to open up the invoice so I can see the preview of the invoice here. I can look at the metadata. Remember, this is the data that was captured, things like the vendor number, vendor name, those items. Remember, I left some of these fields, empty because they were optional. I could go in later on. Maybe now I do want to add a location, or I want to add a department. I want to fill in some of this stuff. I could do that. I can also do the geocoding. So for those non-PO invoices, maybe I want to code these. So I can hit the Invoice Detail button here, and basically I'm looking at the same thing that you would see in Dynamics GP, but of course I'm not in GP. I'm in the ACOM EZContentManager. But I can look at all the fields that are in GP. I can even do distribution. So I can go here and look at the GL accounts. This is the default that's been set for this particular vendor, but I can add additional rows and do different GL accounts, anything I wanted to do to code that invoice. And of course we'll take the totals and we verify the amounts. We verify those up to the total so they all match. So I could code it. Some other things I could do. Maybe at this step I needed to mark this invoice up. So you see I have annotation tools here. I could do a text annotation. I could do maybe a highlight of something that needed to be done, or I need to draw something on here perhaps, or a sticky note. I want to put some text on here. Or I could do an image, like I want to do a digital signature or a stamp or something, or a logo or something I want to stamp on here. So you can always do those things as well. Okay, so I've looked at it. Some other things I could do. Maybe at this step in the workflow I have a question. I can make a comment and I can notify somebody via email if I needed to before I did anything. I could add supporting documents to this. Maybe there's something I need to attach to the invoice before it moves on to the next step, because maybe that next person in the workflow needs to see the invoice, but they also need to see some supporting documents in order to render their approval. I could digitally sign it. Maybe that's part of my approval process, so I'm going to digitally sign it as part of the audit log of the workflow here. I'll go ahead and say review complete, and based on that, it does a few things. That one step actually took the invoice to the end of the approval process. And the way that it did that is I'm going to go step through this. So when I first started that workflow, remember when we brought in those invoices after we captured them, the first thing it did was it looked at the metadata field and determined whether or not it was a utility bill. So what it did was it said, yeah, this is not a utility bill. So then it went to that first step in the workflow that I showed you, the location manager approval. I reviewed it. Then it looked at the dollar amount. So the invoice amount was under $10,000. So it skipped another step and went right to the approval, and then it's completed. So that's, remember that metadata, or using the dynamic routing based on metadata, that's an example, or these are some examples of how that could work. Because if this, say, was over $10,000, there would have been another step that would have been required. So again, very simple example of a workflow, but your process might be 1 step or 2 steps or 3 steps or 10 steps. It's up to you. And keep in mind, you can have workflows for any type of document, not just for AP invoices or accounting-related things. So let's talk about searching. We have documents in here in all these different folders and subfolders. There's a lot of different ways to find documents. I can do a number of different searches. I can search by the file content. This is a full text type search. By the title, by the file name, the folder name. I can do what we call advanced searches. This is where I'm going to search by document type. Or I can build cross-document types searches, meaning I can use any of the metadata fields from any document type to build a single customized search. So let me show you document type search. This is typically how people look for things. So first thing I do is say, okay, what type of document am I looking for? These are the document types that I've created. So I have AP checks, contracts, different things. Remember, we have different types of invoices, a purchasing invoice, a payables invoice. I'm going to look for this purchasing invoice here. When I select the document type, it now shows me the metadata fields that were set up for that document type. Again, those are completely user-defined. So I have things like invoice number, date, amount, description, vendor number, those things. So let's say I know some of this information. Maybe I want to search by the vendor name, or I want to, I don't know the whole name. I'll just put in a few letters of the name. And along with the vendor name, maybe I want to search by a range of dates. Or maybe I do know the specific invoice number. So I do know the invoice number I want, so I'm going to type that in, and I'm going to hit search. So what it does now, it takes me specifically to that invoice because I keyed in that number. So that way, you don't have to, with a paper system, you have to go to the file cabinet, go look for the invoice. Hopefully it's filed in the right spot. It's not on somebody's desk. Pull it out. Maybe I want to take it over the photocopier because I need to email it to somebody. With this, I push a button. It comes right back to me. I right-click it. I can view it if I want to. I hit the preview button. It opens up the preview, and I can see what it looks like. I can right-click it, and I could email it, in a matter of seconds, or I could fax it to somebody if they needed to see it. Again, without having to get up from my desk and go look for it and go through all those manual steps. I can also look at the attached documents. That's what this linking icon tells me. If I click this, I can see that the invoice is linked to the purchase orders. This one actually has a PO. So that way, when I search for any one of the documents, like I just did the search for the invoice, all I got to do is push this button, and I can see everything that's associated to it. So it acts like a virtual stapler. So this is where you might link the invoice to the PO, to the receipt, if you have that, maybe even an image of the payment, so you have that whole packet together. Again, these are things that might be physically stapled together. Now, in paper form, they're electronically stapled for you here automatically. I can also look at the workflow process. So if I look at the icon here, I can see it's a little bit grayed out. That tells me that the approval process is done, but I can click this and go back and see, who did all the approvals, the date and times and everything. So I can always go back to historical information in here. So that's an example of searching. Let me switch over now to Dynamics GP. Remember in the beginning I talked about, yeah, we can look up things, and for those users that are not in GP, everything's done through the browser. Again, very easy to search. But if I am working in GP, I can actually come in here and I can access information directly from those screens. So if I go in, I've created a couple folders basically. One says EZContentManager invoices pending approval. These are invoices that have been, again, we've captured them with the OCR. We've brought them in manually, and they're in here. The transaction's been created, but they haven't yet been approved in EZContentManager. Then I have some that actually have been approved that are waiting to be posted. So here's the one I just completed right here. Here's one that's in here that was already in here. So I can, double-click it, and I can bring up the actual details of the transaction. But you can see my ACOM button here. I can come here and I can say, what do I want to do for this particular invoice or this voucher number? I can say, okay, do I want to add the invoice? So remember in the beginning I talked about a lot of different ways to bring in the invoice. For this one, we don't need to add it because it's already been added. It's created, and remember we scanned it with the OCR tool. But if, let's say that I had an invoice and I was entering an invoice and I wanted to add it from here, maybe I don't want to use the OCR tool for one reason or another, I could add the invoice from here. Or from here I could have a button that said add maybe associated document, because maybe there's something I want to add or attach to this particular invoice transaction, and I could attach it right from here. Anything we add from this screen or any of the screens in GP with our add button will automatically capture the metadata fields that we want from the screen, so we don't have to key that information in again. So this one's already in here, so if I want to see the invoice, I can hit View. It just pops up in the PDF image, and I can see it, right, without having to leave the screen. I can view the workflow. Remember, just like that button I showed you inside of EZContentManager, I can click this and look at the history of the workflow for this particular invoice number. So it just takes me back into EZContentManager. And lastly, I can do a search. This basically opens up EZContentManager and shows me the invoice and any associated documents inside of EZContentManager. So here I'm back in EZCM. I could maybe now do what I wanted to do with this invoice, or maybe I'm just going to start navigating back within EZContentManager. So again, the buttons are nice because we can put them any place that you want. They can be in accounts payable, accounts receivable, purchasing, admin, inventory. So maybe I'm looking at a vendor record and I want to see documents for a vendor. Well, I push a button, I can see all those documents for that particular vendor I'm looking at. Or I'm on the AR side and I'm looking at customer information, and I want to see documents for a customer. I can have buttons on that screen. Completely up to you. They just make it easy for users in here. They don't have to know a whole bunch about EZContentManager. They can just get information back depending on what screen they're looking at. So that's an example of the buttons. Going back a little bit about how you bring documents in, I showed you, remember we talked about the OCR, the optical character recognition. I just showed you the add button within the GP screens. With a number of different ways too. We can just simply upload documents directly from here with the upload button. So I wanted to bring a document that's already in some type of electronic format in here. I could scan paper documents if I had a scanner directly from here. We also have a tool that we call the AP Inbox tool, where I can queue up documents and manually index them or create those metadata fields and step through bringing those invoices in. That's useful if maybe you don't have the volume to justify OCR, but you still want an efficient way to capture the data and bring the documents in. That's another tool that we have. So with that, that's pretty much all we have time for today. A number of things I didn't have a chance to get to talk to because of our time limit, and I'll go over those real briefly here. We have very, very robust security, so you can really control everything of how documents get accessed, starting at the folder level, where I can control things by folder and subfolder by accessing and allowing people in and out of those folders, controlling permissions and access to certain documents. But we can go all the way down to the individual metadata level of a document, where I can secure things, as an example, maybe by the dollar amount in a particular vendor name or a series of vendor names. And then once somebody can see a document or a group can see a document, I can control specifically what they can do with the document. I can say, okay, this user can see all the invoices from this vendor that are under $500, but once they can see them, they can only view them. They can't do anything else. So I've got complete control, not only what I show to a user group, but what they can do with the document once they can see it. We also have version management for controlling multiple versions of documents. So that way you can keep multiple versions, even compare the differences between versions. And also a nice feature called retention management to control what's going to happen to documents at the end of a life cycle. So instead of having to physically, remember to move documents in and out of file cabinets, to free up space as they get older, these retention policies can automatically happen within our system, because remember the documents are now electronic, and they can automatically archive or delete or start in the workflows for review or get moved to different folders, at a certain time period, maybe a calendar date in the future, or when a duration of time goes by. It's a very, very useful feature. With that, I'm going to go ahead and conclude the demonstration portion. I'm going to turn this back over to Mike, and we'll conclude up the webinar.